And welcome back to WY20. I'm your host, Carl Figueiredo, and today we're joined with Union Property Master Dean Goodine. Now, if you are like me and took a little scroll on the IMDb, you'll see that he is renowned for so many different pieces of work. One of my favorite that he's just completed is the Percy Jackson Disney series. Like, I have very, very fond memories of reading the whole Riordan series. It was, funnily enough, one of the only books I was able to complete when I was younger. He's also brought in his book, They Don't Pay Me to Say No, which is about property master in the film industry in general, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But to start us off, thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And I realized as soon as I said Riordan, it is Riordan.
Oh.
I correct myself all the time, and I'm like, oh, which one was it? It is Riordan.
Perfect. Yeah. Here he's an amazing person to work with.
He's a gentle soul, such a nice man, and really passionate about his books, obviously. And we really wanted to give the fans what they expected of the books. I mean, anytime you adapt a book, it is difficult to hit all the notes, given the dramatic license that's going on with the show. But we really wanted to give Rick his show. We wanted the show that he wanted made.
Perfect. And something fun about that series was they did incorporate a lot of the LED wall, which we'll talk a bit about today, and like how you can incorporate that with props as well as set deck and that new era that's coming to Vancouver, and something that I think will really push our industry to fruition. But to begin with, what is a properties master to you? What do they do? What is the man or woman or they them behind the props?
Well, the Coles Note version, the dry part of the interview is that a property master is in charge of anything an actor picks up, moves, interacts with on a set. That can be weapons, firearms, food. We do all the eyeglasses if an actor is in a war sequence, all the web gear, helmets, goggles. We work with stunts and effects a lot because if for instance, Percy Jackson, all the sword fighting, we have to create swords that don't harm people, and the actors have to learn how to fight with those swords. So we work with the stunt teams. And so anything an actor handles, we're in charge of. And it can be creating books, newspapers, files, photographs. If it moves on a stage and an actor is touching it, lifting it, and interacting with it, generally 95% of the time that's a prop.
Perfect. One thing I'm very curious about, because when I do my breakdowns, I have to go like, this is set deck, this is props. Where does the line of set dressing and props diverge? Like for example, if I'm seeing a family portrait just hung up and on one episode they pull it off of the wall, is it a prop the whole time or is it set dressing? Or
if it's identified in the script in prep that photo is coming off the wall and being interacted with, then it is a prop, because the minute it is touched and moved, it becomes a prop. If you're putting it on, if you're doing, say, a radio station or a podcast station in your show and you have photos of your hosts on the wall, then those are set dressing in conjunction with working with the art department and the production designer on the look. But yeah, any photos that get picked up, moved, that piece of evidence that the camera goes in on an insert shot that may change the whole plot of the movie moving forward, or that jumping away from photographs to a map, even if there's a map on the wall, then that's dressing. If the map is suddenly in the hands being used as how we're going to escape and get out of here, it becomes a prop. It really is a fine line, and we work really close with the set decorator, and we want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. Yeah. So we'll talk amongst ourselves and make sure that we are covering, and we're not this is a hard line. It's like, that's mine, that's yours. Yeah. We just make sure that, and sometimes the set decorator will say, hey, can you do the map that's on the wall? Because it'll, even though it's not taken off the wall by the actors, it'll tie into some of the maps you have as hand props. So the same people that are creating our maps may in fact create the dressing map. So it really is a give and take world.
Definitely. No, that's really interesting. And it's cool to note that the worlds do intertwine so much with the different departments. Well, if you could elaborate a little bit more on how the prop would get created, if it's like we're saying, for if you're doing an army scene, you would create the helmets and the glasses. Who takes charge of the look of those props?
If it's being worn,
yeah,
we work with a costume designer. Let's go to Percy Jackson and all the armor at Camp Half-Blood. I sat down with Tish Keating, and basically she had the look and the design of the armor. And by the end of it, she took on the helmets and the breastplates. I just paid for half of it and stayed out of the way because she had such a vision for it. When it comes to gauntlets and cuffs and any of the add-ons, the belts for swords and the scabbards, any of that stuff, that's us. So we kind of work together on all of that. If I'm doing Peter Pan and Wendy, all the pirates webbing and gear and all that stuff that they had, we made that, but we had to make sure that we tied into the costume. So we worked closely with the costume designer and made sure that everything that we do does not pop off their costume. I like to think that the costume is another set that we're invited to work on. So our stuff has to work on that set, just like if we place a prop in the middle of somebody's world, our prop has to blend into that world. It can't suddenly pop off the world unless it's scripted to pop off the world.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it's something that you mentioned earlier. People will notice if something's out of place, but they won't notice if it's meant to be there. And you've done a really good job sometimes if they don't notice that it's there.
I like to say nobody notices props unless they're not there or they're bad. Yeah. Other than that, we just like to kind of feed into the world. And, I tell young filmmakers, especially, I started in indie films as well. And I like to tell young filmmakers that never forget about props, because you're going to invest all this time and energy in making sure, how are we going to get a small crane, or this great, can we afford to shoot on a red camera or an Airy, and you get all the stuff, and your production designers created some great world, but you've given the prop department $9.95 for the prop. So no matter how great a world you have, no matter how great your cinematographer is, all of that will go out the window the minute everybody looks at the thing that's in the actor's hand. They'll go, what is that? Because you gave the prop department no money, no time. There's a lot of reasons. So we're very aware, we're very conscious. My mentor, Jimmy Chow, one of my mentors, he did X-Men and Man of Steel and just a wonderful prop master. He looked at me and he said, the only pressure in props is once you put a bad prop on camera, it's there forever. And I was like, oh man, why did you say that? So, we're always aware of trying to make sure that we do the right thing.
That's an incredibly good point that you make, because it's one of those things that, especially in the indie world, we complain a lot about, where it's like you've invested all your money into the camera, you've invested all your money into just paying the actors, because we say whatever's closest to camera, whatever's seen in front of camera is where most of the money should be spent, especially like when you're working with a lot smaller budgets. And when I'm doing a breakdown, if I'm seeing 70% of the script is props that we're touching or that are influenced in the writing, then why don't we invest that time and money into the props while we're on indies?
I think that, it's just a department that's not out there. It's not known. There's no awards for props. It's just not out there. But yet, you're correct. I was on a film a couple of years ago, and the director's assistant, she'd been with him for about 4 films. And she looked at me one day as we were setting up yet another meeting with the director, and she said, I set up more meetings with props than any department on the movie. And it's because actors are working with our scripted props. I think I built 9 hooks for Jude Law, for Peter Pan and Wendy in prep to get the right hook. And it wasn't, and I loved every moment of that process. Somebody goes, "Oh, you built 9 hooks. That must have been horrible." It's like, no, that's the joy of our craft. It's like, I started working with Jude 2 months before he arrived in Vancouver with sketches and photographs, and he would send back sketches and photographs, and we just started working our way through, what is this hook going to be? We went from a very shiny, beautiful hook to this, something looked like it was built in the cannon room by the guy who can forge iron, and it really was a character because he is called Captain Hook. So I think going back to that original comment you made about, you go through your script as a producer or as a director and you see 70% of your props, 70% of your script require props in a scene, yet nobody's really focused on them because you're so busy getting your actors, getting your locations, getting everything. And all of a sudden comes the day to film and it's like, oh yeah, we need this stuff. Mm-hmm. And you hire the right person, they're going to deliver, they're going to get you the stuff. And I come from a world where I didn't have a lot of money when I started in props, and I was a pretty ingenious person where I could get an electronics factory, and I would build a 4-wall set for a bottle of whiskey. And, you just kind of learn how to talk to people and get stuff. And I said to the person who gave me the electronics factory for a bottle of whiskey, I said, look, when I have a show with money, I'll be back. And that guy's probably made $250,000 off the film industry after that. So, it's a give and take world. You don't want to, I won't go ask for favors for a big corporation that I'm working for. But if I'm working with a small indie producer and I'm doing a small project, I will try to see if I can get a favor for them, but that's the thing.
It's also interestingly enough, I had this conversation with one of my producer friends. It's knowing when to call out those favors. Like you're saying, if you're working for a big corporation, you do have those monies that you don't need to call in that particular favor, but if you call in all your favors on an indie, then when you really need to call in a favor, you might not also have that favor to call in. So knowing where you can call in this favor.
Well, I rarely call in favors now. I mean, I've been in the industry this is my 5th decade, if you count the 80s, 90s. And when I talk about calling in favors, I talk about the first 5 years of my career. When I was really starting out as a prop person, and this is where I was going to be, and I would be doing low-budget commercials or music videos, and I was working with really young directors that I believed in. I believed in them, and I wanted to support them. And the way I could support them was trying to get the best thing in front of the camera for them, which sometimes wasn't great, but a lot of times I would try to come through, or I would go back to them and go, look, we have to either write this out of the script or change it to, I can get you this instead. Yeah. And I think that's the key too, is a give and take world. There has to be flexibility from the production side. You can't say, I want a very expensive prop, but you have no money. You have to settle for what you can afford and what your person can bring you, and accept that or change it.
Most definitely. There was 2 things that you mentioned earlier that I'd love to touch on. One of them, when you were talking about Captain Hook's hook and that it was such a big personality, what constitutes as a hero prop as opposed to a normal prop? Or is there a defining line of what is a hero?
A hero prop is something that is seen over and over again in the show. It can be a story point. As something goes from beginning to end for the most part. It is something that an actor has that they interact with on their person every single day. It could be as simple as their badge and their Glock, for lack of a better term, but it is something that carries with them. For instance, I did a movie and the hero prop was a Zippo lighter with a Korean War Marine logo on it. So you just don't know what the hero prop will be from script to script, but it generally is something that carries on. As far as a background prop, or it's really something that will appear in a day, in a scene, or working with somebody who's not in the top, say, numbers on the call sheet. Like instead of being in the hands of number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it might be in the hands of number 22. And so you kind of, but now with 4K and 5K and supervision, whatever, every prop is a hero prop. I don't think we don't bring anything out to camera that is not considered a hero prop. It's not something that we can play that in the back corner. We bring everything, and we treat everything like it's going to be an insert.
Yeah, it's putting the best foot forward. I was talking to one of my friends about when I have to schedule pickups, and one of the most difficult things is letting the props department know what we're actually seeing for a certain pickup. What happens with your department on pickups, and how do you operate around a pickup day?
Well, we kind of know as we're shooting a scene. If you let's say I said, I'm trying not to do that. If we're doing a scene, we have a lot of paper dressing, files, photographs, evidence, pieces. That's generally anything we know that they're going to, we call it dive in for an insert. We create a section of our truck for what we anticipate as pickup shots. So we'll put like hero paperwork that may have only played that one day, that specific file, but we'll put it in our truck in what we call the hot prop bin or insert bin. So we're constantly maps. Any of that kind of stuff we'll put in. Where it gets a little trickier in the world of AD and scheduling or producer scheduling is if there's a physical rental prop that we can't afford to keep for the run of show, but we need to bring it back for a pickup shot. Where that gets complicated is if it's a short-term thing, we can let the vendor know, look, we're going to need to get this back in a week. And they'll sometimes give us the grace and put it on the shelf off the side and hold it for us. But if suddenly 2 months into the schedule, they're looking at scheduling shots and that something has gone back, we have to see if we can get it back to begin with. But for the most part, anything that's very vital and very hero, we don't let leave the studio. It goes into the lockup. It stays close by. But we generally are working with budgets that will allow that now. Or if we think that it's something that is very pivotal, we'll buy it and keep it.
Keep it with you. Nice. Has there ever been a prop that you were allowed to keep or that you cherish from one of your sets?
Well, with the advent now of all this memorabilia online, and studios are very aware and they archive everything. So for the most part, I've never been one to really keep anything. I generally, by the end of the show, I'm so sick of looking at that stuff, I never want to see it again. So I've kept stuff. I think the stuff that I've kept is mostly from my earlier days of my career doing westerns and mountain films where the producer would say, can you store these props in case we have to come back in 6 months or 8 months and do any pickup shots? And then 3 years go by and you realize you still have a bin of these props in your garage. So I was working with the same producer on from Unforgiven to the Open Range to the assassination of Jesse James. And I remember when Jesse James was starting, I said, I still have props from Open Range. Like, what should I do with them? And he said, oh, just give them away. So I kept Robert Duvall's spurs and one of his gun belts and gave the rest to a rental house. And so don't have much stuff. And nowadays with Percy Jackson or a series of unfortunate events or some of the shows I've done, that stuff just all goes to the studio.
Yeah, cool. So let's walk it back a little bit. When you're first brought onto a show, what do you do as the props master? What is your hiring process the first thing you'll look at, or breaking down the script? Or can you walk us through the steps that one would take?
Very first thing I do is I read the script. I mean, I know that sounds very lame to say it that way, but I read the script because I want to know the story. I want to know the period. And I want to be taken away by the story just like everybody else. And it also allows me to think, how big a crew do I need? What do I need to do to put this show together? So the second time I go through the script, I look at the manufacturing, because that is it's your biggest budget hit usually, and it takes the most time. And especially you have to circle back with like the hook on Peter Pan. You have to circle back with your director, your production designer, and the actors to make sure that you're building the right things. So manufacturing is the first thing I look at. Then I will do a list of questions for the director and ask for a meeting. And I won't drive the director crazy by going, hey, there's a big pen in scene 43. So what I do is I try to hit all the big notes. I sit down with the director and try to hit all the big stuff in the first meeting. And then from there, I have to do a budget. And so that's always a few days of phone calls. And I mean, budgets now for me are sort of born from experience of doing this for a long time. So I can generally do a first pass of a budget that is either really low or really high. I never seem to hit it just right. And so I'll do that next. And then once I get all that together and start my crew, then we just start going for it once everything's approved.
Can you break down your team for me? Like, what's typically known?
Well, all shows are different. I did, because of the strikes last year, I went back to almost my early days of filmmaking. I ended up with Australian director Justin Kurtzel, who has done Nitram and just a wonderful director. And so he had a film called The Order, and it ended up being myself and 4 people, and I worked the set. When I did C, I had 26 people, and of which I had a build shop. Percy Jackson, because I co-prop mastered it with a young woman named Michelle Hendrickson, she reminded me we had 14 people on that crew. But it can vary. I think you always want to have 2 prop people. When you're doing your indie films and smaller films, you want to have 2 people. And then as your scenes grow, you bring in people as you need them. And so it can vary, but generally I would say that we run about 8 people. So to answer your question, prop master, assistant prop master, a buyer, sometimes 2 buyers, an on-set person. If it's not me, then I have a full-time on-set person, and that on-set person will usually have a first assistant on set, and then we have a truck supervisor. And so generally we like to have a minimum of 3 people on the set at all times, and then we come in where we're needed or bring in day calls. So generally we run that.
And then
as a group.
The day calls are what usually constitutes us bringing in a day call, is it?
Well, basically if you have a big scene, Percy Jackson, we did a casino. So we brought in 10 day calls for the week. And so they could help us with the background drinks and chips. And we would give them sections of the casino to take care of. Okay, you're taking care of this section of the casino to make sure people have their drinks and that the chips are there and the cards and all the stuff going on there. So you just kind of look at each scenario of a day and you go, okay, we're doing a firefighting scene. We need some people to help with the fire trucks and stuff like that. So you just look at it that way.
Who takes care of continuity for props? Is it the script supervisor, or will you have one of your on-set people continuously checking the screen?
We are 100% responsible for our continuity. We should never rely on, I love script supervisors, but they have the hardest job on a film set, hands down. I defy anybody to argue with me on that one because they're the editor on set. So they're watching the camera angles. They're making sure the director's not crossing access. They're making sure the actors are not missing a line or flubbing a word that nobody had noticed except for that person. So I feel a great responsibility to not look at the script supervisor and go, was he holding that with his left hand or right hand? So I do ask them questions occasionally. Trust me, I need their help, but I take a great responsibility, and I expect my onsets to also be 100% dialed in. Nobody should be telling them what their continuity is. That's their job.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really valuable because it's also something that I take in the indie world, and I'll tell the directors of, like, hey, if the director is a producer, let's say,
yeah,
I'll be like to them, oh, well, like if you're thinking about the producing whilst you're directing, then your mind's already split, and then you're not aiding anyone else who's here because we're not trying to showcase your vision because you're thinking about something else.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because I will never talk to a director about the budget. When I'm dealing with whatever I'm dealing with, building multiple swords, the firearms, I will never go up to the director and go, well, if we do this, it'll cost this much, or if we do this, it'll cost this much. I will never do that. I only deal with directors in the creative conversation. They don't need to be worried about whether I'm $50,000 over budget on something. They don't need to know that. If the director says, I want that, then it is up to me to go back to the producer and not argue because I don't operate in that world. We just sit down and have a conversation of why I think we should do it this way. Yeah. And if they have a strong opinion why we shouldn't, then we may go back to the director. And I feel like that's the producer's job to go back to the director and say, look, I know you've asked for 5 World War I firing German cannons, which happened to me once, but we can only afford 3. So, that, again, my book is called They Don't Pay Me to Say No. And as somebody said to me on a recent set, do you ever regret that title? I go, every single day, because I get asked for something every day. And I was like, I wrote that book. I can't say no.
No, that's perfect. And one thing I'd love to pivot us back to is when you were talking about your world colliding with like stunts as well as with special effects, where does it turn? Let's say for the cannons as an example, I know that like it's a prop because people will be touching it, but it's a special effects or it's an armorer if it has to fire. This might change from show to show, but what usually happens is that you'll build it and give it to them to adjust it, and then they hold on to it until it comes back.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, I've done cannons a few times. And ultimately, the prop department will get the cannons. That's really it's a prop. So I did a Canadian World War I movie, Passchendaele, and I did Legends of the Fall, which was a Brad Pitt film that also had cannons. And so our job was to get the cannons. What happens with a film like Passchendaele, for instance, is that the effects department comes in and will sleeve the barrel so that we protect the barrel, or the integrity of the barrel might not be able to take what effects are doing with their firing mechanism. They'll make it fire. They'll use black powder charge to make it fire. But we are in charge of getting those cannons and working with effects. We let them know we're getting these cannons in. They'll be in at the certain date. I took care of the cannons. But what I did with the cannons, in both cases on Legends, with which Jimmy Chow was the prop master, he brought up cannon experts from Georgia for the cannons. When I did Passchendaele, I brought in the cannon experts from Manitoba because I got them from the Canadian Artillery Museum. So I again brought in those experts that could teach the actors how to sight and all of that to make it look real. But the effects people were always the ones that fired them.
That's really cool. So is it part of your job to bring it, like if you know we're dealing with a specialty item, to find someone who's able to teach the actors, or
Always. Yes. Every movie, every TV show, if that actor, whatever their role is, whether they're a World War I soldier, whether they're a Western gunslinger, surgeon, anything they do, we are the ones that will find the technical advisor to come in, meet with them, and teach them. I would say 90% of the time, because a stunt team gets involved in that as well, especially when it comes to fight props. We'll build the fight props, but they'll be the teachers. They're the ones that teach the actors how to become master swords people. In our world, we'll bring in a firearms expert to teach them how to fire, and we will take them to the range at times to let them get the feel for the firearm that they're using in the film. And then also if they require on-set expertise, we'll bring in the on-set expertise for that as well.
My head just keeps bouncing with more and more questions.
That's good.
When you're brought onto a show and it's a specialty prop for a certain character, how much say does the character or the actor, actress get into what happens with that prop, or like how it gets made?
You want to have them be a partner in that prop. You never want to surprise an actor. You never want to show up and go, oh, here's your thing. You've never seen it before, but in the next 10 minutes when they call action, you're going to be an expert. You never want to do that with a cast member. You want, as soon as they're signed onto a picture, we will send them emails in an attempt to talk to them. Hey, we're building this for you. Do you have an opinion on this? Or we'll send photos. And when they arrive in town, generally they go to hair and makeup for a consult. They may go through costumes, but the next people they come and see are props. We're always pretty much, other than the director and the producers, we're pretty much the first department that they'll come and see, because we are, through the items we place in their hands, they become the character. Yeah. And so we're 100% dialed in with the actors always.
It's so integral to their performance. You were mentioning to me earlier that you're part of a newer guild that's coming to America.
And it's worldwide, actually. It's the Property Masters Guild. It's I don't know the exact founding date. I apologize. My Property Master Guild fellowship, I think it's about almost 2 years in going now. And basically, it was with the knowledge of getting it out there of what we do. Because there, as I may have said earlier, there are no awards for props. And not that we're out for awards. That's not why we make movies. But on the other side of the coin, we are vital to filmmaking, and we're vital to safety on set. And so we wanted people to really understand what we do. And mentorship is something that has benefited me greatly. And I think that a lot of prop masters that have came into the industry and up until maybe the 2010s benefited greatly from mentorship, because the growth of the industry wasn't that fast at the time. They had there was a certain amount of shows that were being made every year, and if you were lucky, you got on those shows. And then the streaming universe hit with Netflix, and all of a sudden, people were being promoted so fast, and it was something that we kind of anticipated. This is not going to go well. We never anticipated what was going to happen in New Mexico was going to happen. But we knew it wasn't going to go well, because we knew how long it took us to even get the foundation to do our craft with any sense of skill. Because the thing about props is a lot of the lessons you learn are things, it's an on-the-job thing. And something that didn't work in 2 years into your career is still not going to work 12 years into your career. And the ability to push back on an unsafe situation, because the first 5 years of anybody's film career are the most dangerous. They are the most dangerous because there are two things that happen sometimes. Overconfidence and inexperience are two worlds that should never come together. And if you don't have mentorship and don't understand the foundation of your craft, then you're going to have a situation like New Mexico. Yeah. So the Property Masters Guild really wants to educate. They want to grow the base of our knowledge base of our industry, so that young prop people have an opportunity and have the ability to maybe contact somebody. If they get put into a situation where they're not sure, we'll all answer their questions. Yeah. We'll all answer their questions and help them solve problems. That's what we wanted to do. So the guild has been formed, and it's growing, and they have, most departments in film have a guild that represents them. So we felt it was our time.
Yeah, definitely. And it is so important. And the New Mexico thing really highlighted the importance on safety on set. Especially, it's one thing I go into when I'm doing my ADing. It's like safety is everyone's concern, and this only highlights it, that there is a number of people that could have potentially obstructed the catastrophe that was happening if they knew what to look out for. And it's something that I was listening on one of your podcasts you were on, mentioning that if you have 5 steps, I believe you have 5 steps when you're dealing with a weapon.
I have my personal 5 steps, which is pretty much close to what everybody does. And the 5 steps, if they would have just done one on the Rush tragedy, nothing would have happened. I mean, number one, there's no live ammo ever allowed on a set in Canada, especially where I am. It's just my license even states on it, no live ammo. And so what happens is I'll open my vault, and I will check a firearm to make sure that it's completely empty and safe before I do anything with it. It's the very first thing I do. And then if I have to load dummy rounds in it, and what dummy rounds are is it's not real. It has no powder, has no way of firing. And so in some cases we put what is called a rattler, which is a little marble ball bearing in it, and you shake it by your ear, and if you don't hear it, then you don't put it in the revolver. And so, or you have punch primers. And so I'll put those in, and then I'll click it off 7 times in my truck. 6-shot revolver, but 7 shots, just to make sure that it doesn't go off. Then I'll lock it in my case, and I'll go to set, and I'll find the first assistant director, and I'll bring them over, and I'll show them, and I'll click it off for them. And then the camera department, the crew, whoever needs to see it, I'll click it off for them. And then when the actor comes, I do the same thing. So by the time that revolver gets put into an actor's hands, it's probably been fired off at least 21 times, 25 times before they even get it. A lot of old timers say, oh, you're damaging the firearm by doing that. But my reaction is, fine. It's easier to replace a firing pin than a life.
Yeah. So
let's just move on. And so, yeah, that's kind of the 5 steps I follow. And I'm speechless at what happened down there. It was so unnecessary. And I think the key thing for you, Carl, being an AD, going into AD land, is that the one thing you always have to notice on your sets is that nobody is allowed to touch a firearm on a set except for the prop master, the armor, the actor. That's it. No ADs, not even the director, not even a producer. Nobody is allowed to touch that firearm when you're in a firing sequence or you're in rehearsals. Those are the only 3 people that are allowed to touch a firearm. And that's it. So the fact that the first AD handed the firearm in, it wasn't checked by the actor. Not giving Alec Baldwin a pass, but I've never had an actor be my safety check for a firearm.
No, certainly. And touching on just firearms in general, why is it that we don't use remakes of firearms? So instead of like a decommissioned weapon that can shoot blank rounds, can you...
I know your question, and I understand it, and I completely get where you're coming from, because that, why are we using a firearm that can actually fire a bullet and not... With historical firearms, they're not readily available as replicas, good replicas. So in the case of Rust, they were using revolvers from 1880, remakes of them. But for the most part, we do post-production muzzle flash on full auto machine guns now and semi-autos. But that being said, the film industry has an incredible safe record for firearm blanks of over 100 years, because everybody follows those steps. And I did a movie last summer where we did everything practically, because there was a kinetic energy in the actors and using all their firearms that were actually reacting to the blanks being fired that we couldn't replicate with airsoft. And so it's a give and take world. And I think that as a filmmaker, you have to know who you're hiring. You have to look at their experience, and you can't look at your budget and say, well, boy, if we hire that person, it's going to be another $350 a day, but we can get this person that has like 1 credit for this much. So I think you have to look at your script, and you have to analyze the situation and say, okay, we want all of this to happen. We know it's going to cost this much money. And I always say, if you can't afford it, don't do it. Because the consequences of doing it cheaply are what we saw in New Mexico.
Yeah, most definitely. When would you bring on an armorer? Because I remember in your podcast, in the podcast that you were on, that I was listening to, you were mentioning that you also do armory.
Yeah, I do it, but I'm not stupid enough to not bring on an armorer. If there's a firearm firing in a scene, in a shot, I will bring on an armorer, or I will delegate one of my very experienced crew members to be the armorer that day. I will never have that crew member go do a food scene and then run to the firearm. It's like, if they're the armorer for the day, they're the armorer for the day. We will bring in an extra person to help with the food scene. So yes, I've done a lot of armory or secondary, but it was always been under the supervision of the armorer. Even last summer when we were doing big bank heists, armored car robberies, where we had every heavy machine gun you could have firing blanks, I was the prop master, but I was also armorer number 4. So I had 4 people, or 3 people more experienced than me, that were up with the cast, and I was doing the secondary distance stuff, because I will not have a firearm on a set that fires even 1 shot, even a single shot, without an armor. I just won't.
No, and it's going back to what we were talking about earlier. You bring on an armorer for the same reason why we don't make a director think about multiple things, which is to keep that one-track mind on what they're focused on. And you were mentioning about the 2-day,
so a lot of mistakes that a young prop person will make. And I kind of liken myself to it because I kind of thought that way maybe for about an hour after. You take a 2-day course and you think, oh, well, I know what I'm doing now. But the reality of a film set is it's so fluid and the personalities are so varied that it takes years of experience to actually be a good armorer on a set, because you have to always maintain the same consistent calm. You have to be consistent in everything you do. Even if somebody's yelling at you, you have to maintain an air of calm. And if a 2-day course is not going to help you maintain an air of calm. A 2-day course is not going to have you tell the first AD, if I'm not walking into that church, like on the Rust set, with the firearm and I'm not allowed to present it to an actor, then you're not getting the firearm.
Yeah.
So a 2-day course is not going to teach you that. And 4 years on a set is not going to teach you that either. It's going to take a long time. And so I can say this, that Vancouver has the world's best armors that I've worked with because they basically wrote the safety code. There have been no accidents here that I'm aware of. And so you have to allow for those people to be on your set. They just calm everything down, because there are times, actors they get all hyped up and they're shooting and then you have to be able to step in and take it away from them while they're still jacked up in a calm manner. So calm is the key.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good point that you're making, because especially when actors are getting into the mindset of let's say, for lack of better terminology for an actor, if they're doing method acting and they're like, oh, I'm just coming in here to shoot everything. If they stop playing around with it, like it is a toy, then having that voice of reason to come in and take it away because it's being used inappropriately is highly valuable.
It's not pleasant when you have to step in and take something away and say, okay, this is how we have to do this, or we're not doing it. And it's, I've done it a few times. It's never pleasant, but everybody's gone home safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's the main thing, because at the end of the day, it is still a business, and we're still there to do a job, and you want to be coming home to your family at the end.
A line I always roll with is a remote control on a coffee table at the end. In the end, when it's all said and done its theatrical run, whatever's happens, it's a remote control on a coffee table, and am I going to stream it or not? Yeah. That's really what it comes down to.
100%. And lastly, before we hit our break, one last thing I want to touch on is when we're using knives and stuff, because we don't usually have an armor for that. When we've got like a real knife compared to a fake knife, where would you use real compared to fake? Especially what jumps to my mind is in the kitchen, and it's something I've mentioned to the indie prop master who came on. When we always say when a real weapon is getting brought onto set, or like a real knife because we have to chop something, where does the line get drawn with props for having a real knife compared to a fake knife, or what's seen as a set dressing knife?
Yeah, well, as far as if let's start with set dressing. If they've dressed a butcher block on a counter, but we know that a knife is going to be drawn, it's going to be used either to protect themselves in a fight scene, or I'm not just talking chopping vegetables. We'll give them a sharp knife to chop their vegetables. A dull knife is actually harder on a person than a sharp knife. But if it's going to be used as a weapon in a fight, then what will happen is we have the sharp knife. We have an aluminum knife that's completely dull, other than the point is still there. We'll probably make a rubber knife. Then we'll make a chopped off knife with no blade at all. Because that's the great thing about technology now, is that we used to use retractable knives, which would cause more prop people anxiety than anything in the world, because you just didn't want it to hang up. And we'd always put plates on actors so that you got to hit here, so if it does jam up, something would happen. So we will use a bladeless knife now for any stabs or any of that. That we don't even have a blade. It's just a hilt. It's just a handle and a hilt. So if the set decorator is very particular to a knife, this is a knife we want to use, we will buy more of those knives if we can, and we will take them mold them. We'll do a lot of different versions. There'll be probably 5 versions of that knife, different blade lengths, different things, depending on what's going on.
Yeah, that's a really good point that for some reason it doesn't retract.
Yeah, you don't want to use retractable knives. I'll tell your young prop people now, don't do it. If you do retractable, then just have it with no springs or anything that you can just slide into the handle. Just that is a one-way retraction. Like, don't go there.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. And then actually, this will take us to a break. So we'll be back in a second with Dean, and we're going to hear a little bit about the mental health side of things and your worst day on set.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, we'll be back. And welcome back to this side of the episode. So firstly, just to get us back into the flow of things, I'd love to ask you, what was your make it or break it moment in film? Like your worst day in the industry, you ended up looking back on it and you're like, you know what? That's a success story in a dark time.
Yeah, I think that worst day, I can't really pick one, and I know that's a bit of a cop-out of an answer, but, we're always challenged. There's always things that will go a little bit sideways, and you learn from them. But I think the make it or break it section of film was I got called to do something that when I look back on it now, if I had the experience I have now, I should have been terrified. But I looked at it and thought, oh, well, this seems like a challenge. And what had happened was there was a film that was shooting around the world. It was a samurai film called Heaven and Earth, or Tentochi 2, which is the Japanese name. It was only for the Japanese market. And they wanted to stage battle scenes in Alberta on the Morley Flats. And those battle scenes would be 2,000 samurai on the ground fighting and 1,000 horses with riders charging in the scenes. 1,000 horses. And so we had to come up with the system. How are we going to move 25,000 props a day? I calculate, I'm a bit of one of those people, I wonder how many props that is. And by the time I factored in, because we're in charge of all the saddles and the bridles for the horses as well, and all the swords and bows and ancient rifles. And so I calculated 25,000 props and 3,000 background. And we had a wonderful first AD, Bill Bannerman, who's now a producer in Hollywood. And we all worked out a system how we could get all the background off the buses through the process of signing in, getting into their costumes, getting their props, and getting in front of the camera, getting all the horses saddled. And honestly, we had no frame of reference, so I thought, oh, well, this is going to take all day. And so we did a dry run. We had a boot camp with all our key sergeants, so every 50 background had a key sergeant, we called them, who all went on to long careers as ADs, most of them, or producers and production managers. Once we had the boot camp, then they had a boot camp where they taught so we had everybody in. Long story short, we had everybody in front of the camera, propped up, horses and everything, in 90 minutes.
That's a huge feat.
90 minutes. And we were all like shocked, like, wow, that was a fluke. And then we did it again. We did 2 days in a row, 90 minutes. And we could get everybody back and get all our props back in an hour. And it really keyed on teaching everybody how to fend for themselves. And all our props were on racks where if somebody came up to me, I was just the traffic cop at the door when they came in. It'd be like, what's your prop? And they go, archery. And I'd send them to the archery rack, and they would be led by their sergeant. And so it just worked. So they ended up going onto the battlefield and sitting around for about 4 hours, because we only do one shot a day when you're doing that many background and that big a setup with 8 Panaflex cameras and cranes and everything we were doing. And the most amazing shot of that whole experience was we had to do a shot that was the 1,000 horse Black Samurai Army riding through the center of the 2,000 Red Samurai Army. And so we called it the V. So the Red Samurai would part and the horses would go down the center. And I thought, where am I going to watch this? Because I'll never see this again. And so I stood on the base of a big track crane that had about a 100-foot boom or 80-foot boom on it with a basket with a camera crew. And I could hear the horses coming before I could see them, because there was a bit of a rise. And the sound of 1,000 horses coming towards you is, I can't describe the sound, but when they came up over the ridge, they were being led by a samurai in silver armor on a white stallion, and then everybody else were on black horses. And they went on either side of the crane as they rode past. And, we had some of the best riders in North America come up. It was like big summer camp for horse people and rodeo cowboys and whatnot. And most amazing thing. And that moment set up the rest of my career, because there was nothing. Somebody go, oh, we got 200 background today. And I'd be like, yeah, so.
Easy, rookie numbers.
Yeah, so people go, you never seem to get too stressed out about things. And I'm like, I was on a battlefield for about 8 weeks with 3,000 samurai every day. So there's not really much you can do to me that's going to actually get me too wound up.
Yeah, we learn from those moments are the ones that define us.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the exact same thing happened to me on not 3,000 people, but my defining moment was on a cruise ship when we were shooting, and when I came back from it. Every time I go into a new India, I'm like, oh well, I don't know if this experience can compare to that. So it's also why I keep very composed. I would love to learn a little bit more about your book and what my viewers would be able to learn from it when reading it, and like the structure of it. Could you tell me a little bit about why you don't say no?
Well, it's more of a take on when you start your career and you're a freelancer in a gig economy, you realize that if you say no too many times, nobody's going to call you. So I used to just adopt it was just like my own inner mantra that, okay, well, they don't pay me to say no, so I guess I better figure this out. So when it came time to title the book, it seemed appropriate to do that. The book was, I started writing it. I didn't really know I was writing a book. I know that sounds strange. It was just a way to sort of take my mind out of the show I was doing at night. I would do a little bit of journaling or whatever, and it ended up writing a manuscript. And so when I wrote the book, I wanted to make the book accessible to more people than just prop people. I wanted everybody across the industry to maybe get something from it. But more importantly, I wanted their families to get something from it, and their friends. And so the greatest compliments I ever get is, my mom loved your book. And now my mom understands why I'm not around that much when I'm on a show. And so that was kind of the nice part of it. But I have to admit, when I finished it, I really didn't want to put it out. I thought, well, I don't really know what this is. And when the Rush tragedy happened, my wife looked at me and said, you have to put that book out. And I go, why? She goes, people need to understand what props does and how important you guys are to a show and how vital your role is on set. And in regards to safety as well. Now, the book is actually a funny book. It's not a book of how to do this. I wrote it in the spirit of, there's a great Canadian, Stuart McLean, that told great stories on CBC. So I kind of tried to emulate a little bit of that. Bill Bryson, the travel writer. So I really wanted, so every chapter is not long and every chapter concludes. And it's the type of book that's written for film workers like me who can only read 3 pages of a book a night because I'm so exhausted. So I really wanted people to enjoy it. And the one thing I did add at the back of the book was I added a glossary of film terms and how I interact with them, like what's my interpretation of a key grip, gaffer, costume designer. And so a lot of people said, now I watch the credits, I understand what that position is. So, the book's traveled well. It's in UBC. I noticed the Swedish Film Institute has picked it up. So it's making its way out there on word of mouth. That's
perfect, because like everything you're describing is the essence of what this podcast aims to achieve. It's showcasing to the families and the friends of like, okay, this is what I do. This is the job. This is
it's hard to explain. I opened the book with the very first lines of the book. I kind of wrote it like a movie script where it's we're standing at a barbecue and a guy goes, hey, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a property master. And the guy goes, oh, you work in real estate? And I go, yeah, no, not exactly. So that's kind of how the book goes from there.
Perfect. And it sets the tone.
The main thing is I wanted to make people smile. It's not a mean book. There's not a mean bone in that book.
No, that's incredible, because when I first started getting into filmmaking, I was looking for this glossary, essentially the glossary that you have at the back of what are key terms and what do I need to know as an AD to call out. And there isn't really a written key term defining internet thing that you can look up, because like even like circus, what is circus? And
I mean, it doesn't really have that. It's just more about department heads, but I just really I just wanted to inform mostly our families and friends, the people who sometimes don't get to see us when we're on a long show. And I'll finish with this one about the book. Set decorator friend of mine last year sent me a message. I hadn't seen her in a few years. She said, I gave my book to my grandpa because of the Westerns you've done. I knew he'd be interested in those. And she said, I had such great conversations with him after that. It was like that book brought us closer, and then her grandfather passed away. So the last 6 months of his life, my book brought them closer. And I thought, wow, that's quite a message to get.
That's incredibly touching. And it's definitely going to be a book that I pass on to my parents, because quite often, one thing that I love about this podcast, my mom messaged me after I had started releasing the episode, and she's like, oh, it's a way that I can keep more in touch with you, and being able to see you, even if we're not able to talk as often.
That's fantastic.
And I think like having something like this where she can look over and be like, okay, well, like this is even more of a deep dive into what we do and why we do it.
Yeah, although the stories are prop specific, they're relatable to every person who works in film.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for bringing it on and showcasing it for us. So the viewers who are interested in props or just film in general are able to get a deep dive into it.
Yeah, it's just another deep dive into the show.
So that's a way to get the comedy out of the film. Now I would love to segue into talking about mental health in the film industry. So we work in a world that we do sometimes 12 plus hours a day, especially when we're shooting on camera. Is there anything that you can comment that you notice specifically related more to the props teams that you guys might go through, especially like?
Well, we're always the last minute solution to something that's dreamt up on a set. You have your script, you have your breakdowns, and all of a sudden you'll do a blocking and something may not be working for the actor or the director, and they've decided they want to do something else, which sometimes means a phone call and my classic line of, how much time do I have? And so the ability to just maintain a level of calm. I mean, you have to be able to say, look, I can do this or I can't do this. Don't just automatically say I can do this, because you'll put so much pressure on yourself. As far as the mental health aspect of the industry, I'm very aware as a department head, and I have a lot of rules I follow as a department head with my crew. One, I will never email them after we're done for the day unless it's a schedule change or a time change. I will not email them, because my first thought is, what difference if I tell them now or tell them at 7 a.m, because all I'm going to do is cause them a terrible night's sleep. Or so I don't contact them at night. I will not contact them on weekends. I just will not do that. I feel like we give 60 to 80 hours a week, sometimes more. That's enough. You have to allow people to have their life. You have to allow people to have their weekends. And if you have people on your crew that have children, as I always say in prep to them, look, you have to tell me in advance that things are coming up. I don't want to hear after the fact that you missed an important thing for your child because you thought the show was more important, because it's not. You will not get that time back with your child. Shows come and go. But you just have to give us notice. You can't come in the day of and go, oh, I have to leave at 4:00 for something. Like, that's not fair to us either as a team. But on the other side of the coin, I will bend over backwards to try and accommodate everything, especially around family, because this industry will eat relationships faster than any industry I know. And my wife and I happily been together for 38 years, and she's a retired Academy Award nominated set decorator and a Canadian Screen Award winner as well. And we had a rule. You had 15 minutes at the end of every day, and we were on a lot of the same shows together at times. And I called it the key in the door rule. You put the key in the door, you have 15 minutes to talk about film, and after that, we're not talking about it. And on Sundays, no talk about film. And you'd be surprised. People go, well, what do you talk about? Well, we're like normal human beings. We have other things going on. The other thing, in the first 5 years of your career, you become all focused. You're so, I can't believe I'm in this industry. I'm going to do everything I can to get through. And suddenly you forget about your friends. You forget about all the things that you used to do that brought you joy, because you become so focused on this one thing. And you have to get back to who you were before you started working in film. You have to find that balance. And balance is so important. And whatever hobbies you used to do, whether you mountain bike, whether you ski, whether you just want to get out in nature, you paint, you write books, whatever you do, don't put all that away, because you need a distraction. Because after about 5 years, you realize that, hey, I do have a career in this, and you realize also that you're burning yourself out. So you have to be able to deal with that. Mental health is incredibly important. And at the end of the day, as I said earlier, it's a remote control on the coffee table at the end of the day. So if somebody's yelling at you, just remember at the end of the day, it's not sometimes worth it. If you're in a toxic situation and you can't, and you talk to people on the show about how you can get this toxic situation resolved, if it's not resolved, then don't stay. Because it will take more out of you to stay and try to appease the toxic situation than extracting you from it. So that's kind of my mental health pitch.
That's such valuable advice, because as you're saying this, I'm seeing it showcased in my life as well. The whole, I love what you're saying about the first 5 years. This stuff will usually happen, because I'm in a relationship with someone in the film industry, and those are things that we're seeing, that like we're letting certain hobbies slip away, and we're letting little bits of our lives be taken.
Well, to further that, I mean, that's, in fact, my marriage did kind of hit a wall. And I knew that if we wanted to survive this, we had to figure it out. And we did. And we figured it out 33 years ago. And it's been great.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic to hear the success stories of you. Okay, so now we've reached the segment that I've asked the internet, I've asked some friends, I've asked some film colleagues questions that they want to know from a professional filmmaker like yourself, specifically with the props department.
I'm very overrated. Just want to say that.
Oh, I don't know about that. Let's get into it. Let's find out what these questions are. Perfect. So, question one, what's the most creative solution when creating a soundless prop? Have you ever had to do that?
We're always mindful of sound. I mean, I have great friends that are sound mixers and boom people, so I'm always very aware of what my materials are. I don't know if I can say a specific soundless prop, but I'm also aware that if I'm making a prop, that I can't have anything that crinkles, or if I have something that has to open and close, a blade or whatever. I do everything I can to make sure everything is silent. There are times when natural sound works, but it's everything from soundless bags that you can get out of Hollywood to even I remember in a scene where the actress asked for Coke instead of coffee in her coffee cup. And after take one, the sound mixer came in and said, I can hear the fizz inside the... So I had to water. I went to the actor and said, look, I've got to water this down because we can still hear the fizz of the Coke. So I'm always very aware of that. So I wouldn't say that could say, one specific thing that I made soundless, because it's something that I'm very aware of every prop, and I'm very aware of sound in every prop.
No, that's awesome, because it's, especially with indies, it's something that we don't really think about, I'm sure, being like a situation over this weekend. We were having a controller, and the actress was button mashing, and it was creating all types of sound issues for the sound person.
Yeah, and I think there you probably would end up wanting to put foam replace the buttons with foam or something that she could push and mash, but it wouldn't have that click 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 sound. Then you could put it in post.
Ooh, awesome. No, that's great to know, and it's such a good tip for any property masters out there. Question 2, most expensive prop build, and what specifically made it expensive?
Well, I know prop masters who've built $1 million props. That's certainly not my wheelhouse. I tend to skew to smaller shows, but my favorite prop, which was also probably my most expensive in one build, and then we built subsequent from that, was the spyglass on A Series of Unfortunate Events, the Netflix version that Barry Sonnenfeld directed. And the spyglass that we built had 82 moving parts. And so it was all CNC'd out of brass. We had to create an alphabet for it in the code rings. The code rings all moved. And I just remember my very first meeting with Barry Sonnenfeld and Bo Welch, the designer, Bo Welch, who's Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands are some of his films. And I had a paper towel roll and a toilet paper roll taped together. And I said, look, I'm not inspiring confidence right now, but I'm just looking for the size of this thing. How's this length? And we had a wonderful illustrator, Warren Flanagan, who does a lot of my prop illustrations. Pretty much every prop on Percy Jackson was drawn by Warren. And Warren had drawn the spyglass. And so I had the illustration, but I had to figure out size. I went to a shop in Burnaby, Unlimited Design, and those guys just nailed it. It was like a piece of jewelry when it was done. And at the end of the day, I think we probably spent, if you figure material costs alone, it was probably $60,000, $80,000. But then you factor in the man days for all those shops. We probably spent over $100,000 developing the one, and then we could build the rest of them for around $25,000 because we had all the programs were created for the computer CNC machine.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. And it was such a work of art seeing that on the screen.
Yeah, it was the one prop that traveled, that and Klaus's glasses traveled through all 3 seasons. Other than that, that was like every show was a new world. So it was a high stress, high anxiety ride, but it was also very rewarding.
Most definitely. Which department takes the lead when combining props, costumes, special effects, and when they intertwine? Who usually takes the lead when you're in the props department?
Well, it's always situational. Obviously, if you're doing, say, pirates on Peter Pan and Wendy, then the costume department will take the lead on the tone. We will still design our own baldricks and whatnot, but we always tone out our tonal into that. When it comes to stunts and special effects, with special effects, going back to what we talked about the cannons earlier, I'll still get the props. I'll still take the lead on getting the item, and then special effects will make it work. Doesn't mean that I will walk up to them and go, here you go, make this work. I will go to them and go, I'm thinking about getting this. What do you think? We're always collaborating that way. Like, I'm going to get this. It has to do this. What do you need us to do for you so that you can make it do this? With stunts, what will happen is I'll sit down with the stunt coordinator and we'll determine what the weapons are, and I will get them proxies for training. Especially for building Percy Jackson, we had to build all the swords. They weren't ready by the time the cast would arrive. So we do the blade lengths and everything, so we would give them proxies to work with. And sometimes it's like a glorified pool noodle, for lack of a better term. But we would give them things that would approximate the length so that they could stage all their swings and their action and not get too close to each other, or not, oh, your blade's suddenly 6 inches longer than you said. And we worked out. So it's like a dance. So everything has to be very precise. So it's always situational. There's never really a hard, fast rule on that. So it works that way.
Awesome. How and when do you say no specifically to last minute requests? And do you have any stories about this? And we have touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that obviously I hate to say no. It's really a difficult word to say, but you do have to say it. Safety is obviously the number one thing for me on a set, and especially if I'm doing a firearm shot, and I think that we can't do it safely. And if the director wants to fire a blank, it's up to me to say, yeah, we can fire a blank or not. And you have to be very quick, and you can't negotiate that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, well, I'll change my mind if it's really a yes and no. And as a matter of fact, when I did this action movie last year with Justin Kurtzel, he, at the end of the film, looked at me and goes, I've never had somebody make decisions as fast as you on a set, ever, when it comes to firearms. And in my personal life, I have no interest in firearms. I have zero interest. But on a film set, it's a tool that I have to make safe in an actor's hands. So I'm not afraid to say no, especially when it comes to safety. When it comes to a director or a cast member asking for something at the last minute, all I can be is honest. I can do this, but it's going to take me 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And so you just have to be honest.
I think that's the biggest thing, especially in the film industry, like keeping them informed. And then it essentially gives them the ownership again. You want this is how long it's going to take. You'll have to adapt. And if you can't wait that long, then obviously then you don't want it that bad.
No, exactly. And you don't want to compromise shooting in any way, because at the end of the day, you don't want a crew of anywhere from 50 to 200 people looking at you trying to fix something or do something that wasn't planned. And so we like to, a lot of times the key in props is anticipating the ask. That's the one thing I didn't touch on, is that when I read a script, I actually put myself in the set in my mind. Even though I don't have the design, maybe, I can read a script and I can go, okay, we're in this scene, we're in this room, this is going on, scripted. What else could they ask for? Mm-hmm. What is an option? What could I have as a plan B or C? So a lot of times, if the budget allows, I will have at least one option, if it's not super expensive, for what I anticipate the ask might be.
Right.
I remember I was just doing a show before Christmas, and we had a scene where they constantly had to ring the doorbell, and so I just said, buy me one of those battery-powered doorbells, and threw it in the thing. The AD came up to me and goes, you don't happen to have a doorbell, do you? And I go, well, I do. So, you just have to be able to anticipate the ask. A lot of times, I don't get surprised a lot, in all honesty.
And I think that's also, do you think that's mainly because of the experience and that you've gone through so many sets where they may have asked for those things, or?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, going back to props, is that, or any film position really, I mean, we're based on things that happened before and things that you may not have had before, and you'll make sure you have it the next time.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that, is that's what experience gives you, is it gives you the ability to, okay, that didn't, like I said earlier, that I didn't have that 10 years ago, but I'll have it this time.
Now I can have it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Lots of people are interested in props building. What do you look for when hiring?
Well, I look for a really good portfolio. I think that entering prop building unknown is difficult. Usually new prop builders come through their relationship with other prop builders. So I find that once I find a prop builder, they don't get away from me. I've been working with the same builder since I came to Vancouver for the most part. And so I'm usually not the one that will hire a new builder in my shop. I usually allow my shop people to tell me who that person will be, because they've come across them on another show or something. So, but generally, I just had this question on a Percy Jackson panel the other day, and I said, just this young woman who was interested in prop building, I said, photo everything you make, create a portfolio. Eventually, you'll edit that portfolio, but just photograph everything you make, because you never know what somebody will be looking for. And usually you get the hardest job to get in film and television is your first job. That is the hardest job, to get that door open and get in. But once you're in, it's up to you to stay. And you have to be consistent, and you have to, don't take on things that you can't do. Don't say, I can build this, and then get halfway through and go, oh, I really don't know how to build this. Like, just be honest up front.
Yeah, definitely. Props are highly specific. How do you make sure your department runs smoothly?
I'm an old hockey player. I'm retired now, obviously, from hockey, because I was a goalie and I can't see the puck anymore. And they seem to think that they want you to see the puck when you're a goalie. I put my department together like a sports team. I had a producer tell me that years ago. He and I were talking one day, and I told him I put my department together like a sports team. He said, "Well, that's how I build a crew." So in saying that, I put specialists in various positions that they can succeed. I don't put people in places that they're uncomfortable. Like, I'm not going to take a builder from the build shop and suddenly go, you go by the camera and run the set. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to take somebody who runs a set and put them in the build shop. So I'm very specific to roles, and I put people in those roles to succeed. I have a great ability of hiring extremely talented people and keeping them with me. That's probably my greatest asset as a prop master, because pretty much I walked into my shop on Peter Pan. I stood there and looked around at all and thought, I might be the least talented person in this room, but I had the great ability of hiring all of them. And so what I look for in a team is that I put people in, always as a department head, put people where they're going to succeed. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's really nervous and doesn't like pressure, then don't put them by the camera. But they might be great in the shop on the bench. So you just have to kind of analyze people. People have to be where they want to be. Film, it's a long day. It's 12 hours a day on average. And if you don't want to be in a specific spot, that's a long 12 hours. But if you really want to be there, it's a very fast 12 hours, as I've learned. When I'm working on set, time goes fast. So just make sure that people are where they want to be, put people where they can succeed and feel good about themselves, and they'll have a long career.
And last question, what are your tips and tricks to becoming a successful properties master, or what can someone just starting out do differently or start doing to?
I think that mentorship is incredibly important. I think that don't be in a hurry. This industry will hand you the ball. They'll say, you can be a department head. You can be a department head tomorrow because I don't have anybody else to do this job. So you can have that job. But if you make a mistake early in your career, you'll never recover from it. And so don't be in a hurry. If you want to work as a property master eventually, then find out who the great property masters are, in the case Vancouver, and try to get on one of their teams and stay with them. Don't be in a hurry. Don't be seduced by title. Just don't. Eventually you'll get there if that's your goal. I will end with this. My first job as a property master on an American feature film was 10 years into my career. And I got drugged into it. I didn't want to do it. And when I was on that film, I barely survived it at times, but I had at least 10 years of experience working with other prop masters. And I took every trick I knew from those guys and took them to the set. And I was so grateful I had that 10-year foundation of assisting before I prop mastered an American feature film. And so if there's a way for you as a young prop person to just be patient and make sure that you gather the knowledge and experience you need to succeed, you'll have a long, successful career. If you rush into it, you'll get burned out. You'll become bitter. There's a lot of things that'll happen to you. I've seen a lot of prop people wash out fast because it's a high stress, last minute department, always.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for bringing all your wisdom to this podcast and showcasing to the viewers everything that your department has to offer and the nuances from your department. Now we've reached that segment of if someone is listening to this and they want to know where they can find you, get a hold of you, where can they reach you, or where can we link them to?
Well, I guess if they contact you, you have my email address, they can certainly send an email, and I'll always endeavor to answer. It may not be quick sometimes, depending on what's going on with the show I'm on. And my goodness, we get 100 emails a day from the show, and you're always wading through. So be patient. I will try to get back to everybody, as always. That's probably the best way. And I'm always happy to answer questions. And if you are interested, not that I'm plugging books, you can get them at the Vancouver Public Library. I'm big on libraries. I'm so happy that that my book is in libraries. So the Vancouver Public Library have a few copies. North Vancouver Library has a copy. So if you're really committed to wanting to do props, maybe just read a few chapters or read the book. It's not so much about how to do the job, but it's how to survive in the job sometimes and how to have a long career.
Perfect. And then lastly, if there's one thing we can showcase at the end of this episode, whether it's a piece of your work that you enjoyed, your IMDb, or even just the book, what can I put at the end of this to showcase people some of your work?
Is it a clip or is it a photograph?
It's been both so far. I've had clips for people to view. It's been photographs.
Wow. I'm particularly proud of one film, and whether you find something on it. My greatest work as a prop master is a film that nobody really watched. It's an art film, but Roger Deakins shot it, and it's the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. It's a cinemaphile type of film. The movie's as long as the title, but there's a train robbery sequence that's probably one of the most magnificent lit sequences of film in history. Now, I'm supposed to showcase my work, but it's a collection of Roger's lighting and just the way that whole sequence has come together. And so in my world, it's all the guys have their firearms, and Brad has the lantern on the ties, and they're robbing the mail car. And that little sequence is it's just part of a body of. I've been lucky. Somebody says, "What's your favorite film?" I don't know. I worked on Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood all the way through. I've been lucky. I've been lucky.
Awesome. Well, I guarantee you I'll find this sequence and it will go at the end of this podcast so we can see it.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. And that's What's Your 20 with Carl Figueiredo and with Dean Goodine. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Carl.
Cheers. Glorious Union is dripping with our blood. Take this private banner, it is all I could. Ooh, I'm a good old rebel. Now that's just what I am.